porch upstairs, above the front porch on which we started our tour some time ago. Here in this left corner, we have remnants of childhood and remnants of long ages gone by. This table is a sand table that my father made for me when I was 4 or 5, something like that. In the winter weather, we could not play in the sand pile outside under the elm tree, and so he made this sand table which could be inside the house, put baby sand into it. I had special toys and dolls and various objects that I could use to play, and so my cousins and little friends and I had a lot of fun in this sand table as well as in the doll house. On the wall, we have some special souvenirs of my father's photography. You remember I said that he had one of the first cameras that came to Austin, and in those days, photography was handled by a do-it-yourself kit. You had to do your own developing and enlarging and whatever, unless you wanted to send everything back to Rochester, New York for Eastman Kodak to do it. Anyway, these are pictures which my father took and enlarged. As we were saying, my father took these pictures, he developed them, enlarged them, and framed them. They show a part which is no longer in existence and which some people find awfully hard to believe, but it was an indicative part of my grandfather's choice to buy this property. These pictures show the lake, as they called it, the lake or the pond of water, which existed just west of the house where Pressler Street now is. All of the water that you see here in these pictures, where the water was there, just west of the house. It was impounded into a lake by the front hill, which extended westward. You remember when we were on the front porch, we commented on the fact that originally the front hill, now chopped down abruptly to Pressler Street, did extend westward and upward, so it was the embankment that made this little lake. The lake was fueled, so to speak, filled from a spring underneath the lumber room, which is behind the house. The lumber room was built before the house was, so that the workmen would have a place to put their tools and a place to run to in case of bad weather. That little lumber room is still standing because my grandfather chose to keep it when the contractor thought he might be moving it. But anyway, that spring flowed even after the front hill was cut out, flowed as a creek down Pressler Street, went under what is now 6th Street, and off down to the river. It has been mostly covered over by the city in recent years, but not too long ago, walking down on West 1st Street, below the Humane Society place, I saw the ditch where the little spring is still trickling along toward the river. Now moving along to the next picture over here, which my father also took, developed, and enlarged, we see a picture of the front of this house before these columns were added. And you remember my mother and the contractor built these columns by buying the cypress trees and filling in with bricks and mortar and paint. But this picture shows the front of the house with the simple frame porch and the simple wooden posts. These are members of the family seated and standing here, and my father was taking the picture. But my father very much wanted to be in the picture with his family, so afterwards he had somebody take a picture of him, and then when he developed it, he cut that out and pasted it into this picture so that he is standing right over here. The other people in the picture are here, his brother Asher, my uncle Asher. Here, his mother, my grandmother, Mrs. R.K. Smoot, Sally Graham Smoot. Here, his father, my grandfather, Dr. Smoot, Richmond Kelly Smoot. Here, Lawrence Alexander Graham, my grandmother Smoot's brother, who came here to live. Here, his daughter, great Uncle Lawrence's daughter, Lena Graham, who also came to live here when they moved here from Bowling Green, Kentucky. And then here, Frances Sampson Smoot, who married my Uncle Asher. She's of the old Sampson family, the Sampson building still standing on Congress Avenue. Around this corner we have other pictures of a different sort. This is an oil painting by one of those itinerant painters we've mentioned several times. This one was an agony of my childhood. This was painted after Grandfather Smoot had taken the president of the Southern Pacific Railroad on a big hunt out in West Texas. And this was the kill, so to speak, the kill of the day. In this painting, maybe you can see, although I know it's rather darkish coloring, but maybe you can see right here the poor little rabbit, no longer living, but his eyes still open. And when I stood here as a child looking at that poor little dead rabbit with his eyes open, it just reduced me to tears. And I couldn't forget it. I couldn't stay away from it. And finally my mother, in considerable annoyance, said, well, if it makes you cry, why do you go look at it? Just forget it. Stay away from it. But somehow it had a special feeling for me. The kill, as we said, I believe, on the back porch when we mentioned the deer, was not for so much for the sport of killing, never for the point of adding up their kill, but they did actually eat the products of their kill, and they were saving as much as could be. They never did just kill and kill and kill for spoilage. Moving on to the picture against this wall, we have a sort of an odd symbol for my mother's earlier life. Before she married, there was a time when she and her oldest sister, who lived with us here later, went to Harvard University in the summertime. It was the second year that Harvard, in the summer, allowed women to attend. Now, this was not too long after the turn of the century, and it was really thought quite scandalous by some people that young women were allowed to attend Harvard at all, even if merely only in the summertime. But anyway, my mother wanted to go, and sister went along as her chaperone, because young women didn't travel alone in those days either, and that was a special time for them. Coming home, my mother decided that since they'd already been on a long train ride, they needed the adventure of coming home on a ship. And so they went to the Mallory line and docked passage on the Algonquin. And they both were delighted, except that sister, my aunt, did become seasick, but otherwise it was an adventure. And they docked at Galveston and came on home. Well, many years later, one of her other sisters, named Carrie, living in Galveston, married to a pharmacist, did take in boarders occasionally, people who came on the cruise lines and who needed to stay in Galveston a while but did not want to go to a hotel. So there was a man of the Mallory line who came to stay there, and although she charged just a simple amount, he paid extra, and later sent to her this painting of the Algonquin in his line, not knowing anything at all about my mother's adventure on the Algonquin, and just sent it as a token gift, you see. It is an oil painting. So my mother, going down then to visit after my aunt had received this present, immediately recognized her ship and was thrilled over it. So my Aunt Carrie then gave it to my mother, as a souvenir of her one cruise. Before the painting, you see here a rather tall bed. Tall because it is a stack of feather beds, all on top of each other, all of them that were traditionally and customarily used on the place. When I was a child, we had one feather bed underneath the person and another feather bed on top. You remember that the house was heated only by fireplaces, and at night the fires were allowed to die down for safety, so the house became quite cold, and the feather beds were necessary. But to me as a small child, they were a considerable threat. I was picked up and put down in the middle so that the feathers all fluffed up around me, and I felt I was already in the bottom of a hole. And then they'd put this other one on top, and I was sure they were trying to smother me because it was a feeling of being trapped. I just did not like that at all. So when in many later years it came my time to deal with things in this place, I looked at those feather beds and I decided it was time for me to control them. So I just put them all on one bed, and every 2 years or so I have the yard man help me peel them back, and then I dump a whole box of mothballs in between each pair of feather beds to preserve them. For what, I'm not sure, but anyway, part of my duty to try to take care of things, and so the feather beds. Otherwise, this porch looks down on what used to be, long, long years ago, just wide open country. You remember when we started our tour, we said that this was country because the city stopped with Shoal Creek. And so this was quiet and peaceful, beautiful, no neighbors, no noise. All of the noise you're hearing in the background would have been thought nightmarish in those early days. Impossible. They would never have dreamed this could have happened. But we still have the trees, and we still have, looking down into the front yard, something of the greensward, as the British would call it. We have flower beds, which are naturalized. The whole place has gone to nature, which is the way I like. I believe in xeriscaping. I believe in cooperating with nature to maintain all that it will, and I just try to do on the edges and the sides what's necessary to keep it as neat as I can, and then I don't do enough. But looking down here into the front yard, it's a little bit of a cushion, a buffer against the commercialism and the noise that have pushed in with our modern times. As we swing on farther to the west, we see one of the old live oaks over here on the left. Just the edges of it can be seen. An old tree thought to be well over 500 years of age, so arborists have told me. And you see the background of all the commercialism behind it, all of the noise of traffic, but that noble old tree keeps going. And right in front, straight ahead of us, is a Spanish oak tree, and still another over on this side, which are young in comparison, but they are doing their best to promote and maintain nature also. Interesting little touch about those two trees. One of my mother's sisters, her youngest sister, I called her Aunt Tucky. Her real name, believe it or not, her real name was Virginia Kentucky Williams. And her name was shortened to Tucky. But anyway, Aunt Tucky had a genius for growing things. Somewhere she had found two very beautiful Spanish oak trees. So she managed to get an acorn from either one which was gold and one which was scarlet red. Planted them in separate flower pots, and they grew. They were about 2 feet high when my aunt decided to move and change her living conditions, and so she gave those two little trees to my mother, and my mother planted them right here in the front yard, and now you see that they are already sizable trees and well along their way to match up to that age-old live oak right over there. So just blank out all the noise and try not to see the pavement of 6th Street. Try to think back to the year 1877 and you will know what this used to be. Thank you for coming.